Okay, this video is a book review, and here is the book called The Romantic Manifesto by Ayn Rand. It's a magnificent book. It's the best book she ever wrote. I've read a bunch of her books. It's extraordinary. It's better than Fountainhead. It's better than Atlas Shrugged. Okay, and it kind of goes with this book, Arthur Schopenhauer and the Art of Literature. These are the two best books I've ever read about how someone should write, like write a novel, or just write in general. Okay, Ayn Rand emphasizes especially fiction, like writing a novel. Schopenhauer sort of emphasizes writing nonfiction, but there's overlap between the two. Ayn Rand is, she's an incredible genius. She's the smartest woman who ever lived. She's the greatest female philosopher of all time, the most influential female philosopher of all time. And where she's coming from is she had grown up, born in 1905, and she knew what had happened in the 1800s. And she grew up in Russia, but she went to college in Russia. She had read extensively the English authors, the French authors, and she knew how magnificent the literature was of the 1800s. It's extraordinary. So she has this very comprehensive view of the literature, up until about 1950. And she asked herself, why did everything go downhill after World War I? And that's what she was trying to figure out. I wanted to figure out what happened to romantic literature. By romantic literature, she means romanticism, and she calls it romantic realism. And in the sense, what she's talking about, it initially started being hyper-emotional, like the work of Byron and Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron, the English poets. But it later led to all these novels, including like Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and that sort of thing. And it was magnificent, and she's trying to understand, why was it so good? Why does everything stink after World War I? Okay, and she says World War I was the end of romantic literature. It was the end of all that, the end of sort of naive hopefulness. And she says, you ask yourself these questions. Is the universe rational or not? Does man have free will, or is his life predominantly determined by fate? The answers to these questions will determine how he thinks, believes, lives, and writes. And you're headed down two paths, and I think this is important to get this, is there's two ways that life is looked at primarily in the Western world. One is down the path of, let's call it, Aristotelian Christianity. Aristotelian, Aristotle goes to Aquinas, goes to the Catholic Church, goes to the Renaissance. And that's the good way to look at things, and that's the view that Ayn Rand shares, versus the other view is Plato. Plato is collectivist. He sort of admired Sparta too much because Sparta had defeated Athens. That leads to St. Augustine, that leads to Luther, that leads to Protestantism, which is kind of bleak. And that can very easily be warped into collectivism. It's a mentally weak long-term philosophy to have. And I'll explain more of it, but Arthur Herman basically said you can either look at the world from a Platonic point of view or from an Aristotelian point of view. By the way, I'm a hardcore Aristotelian. I actually consider myself a modern Aristotle, and I think that's a much better way to be because it means that you have free choice. Your ability to have choices, volition, to make decisions in your life has a big deal on how your life turns out, and it's a hopeful point of view because what it says is what you do, think, and learn has a big effect on your life, rather than saying, you're just screwed. You're either born smart or you're not. You're either born rich or you're not. You're either born into the good ethnic group or you're not. So I very much like the idea that you can do a lot to help yourself. Some of it is fate, but you can do a lot to help yourself. Okay, so she says, man needs a comprehensive sense of life in order to integrate his values with the decisions he must make in life. Art is the concretization of metaphysics. Now that's a great line. So what she's basically saying is art is the concrete representation of your value system. It's how a man says, this is how I see life. This is what I believe is important and meaningful and useful. And art gives a man a concrete version of his long-term goals. Okay, and I know like when you see beautiful work, it inspires you. For example, there's a lady by the name of Anna Osborne. She's this genius neuroradiologist. She's a Mormon out of Utah. And she wrote this magnificent book of neuroradiology. It was by far the best textbook I had ever seen in medicine in the 1990s. And that gave me the idea, wow, I would love to someday write a book like that. And so you keep that idea in your mind's eye of artistic excellence, and then you hope someday working on your own, developing your own skills, you'll be able to create something wonderful like that. Okay, there are two main types of novels. There is the romantic realistic style, the Ayn Rand style, which is the best, where typically there's a male heroic character who endures a whole bunch of setbacks and tries to overcome them and hopefully eventually succeeds. Okay, and that would be like James Bond in a James Bond movie. Okay, that would be like, James Galt in Atlas Shrugged, Howard Rourke in Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Okay, Hank Rearden in Atlas Shrugged. Okay, so she loves the idea of this hero overcoming obstacles, and usually it's a male hero, and that's another one of the reasons why Gone with the Wind was so unique. The hero of Gone with the Wind was a female, Scarlett O'Hara, and the book was written by a female, Margaret Mitchell. It's a great psychological study of how women think and behave. Okay, like I said, I went through romantic realism as being related to Aristotelian Christianity, and naturalism, which is the most common style in the modern world, is like predestination, no morals, random events and fate determine our lives, and it's a collectivist viewpoint, sort of like Eastern philosophy, the idea of a godless world, and there's just Maya illusion, and there's no point in trying to figure things out because nobody can figure anything out, and it just leads to not much. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why there's lots of high IQs, people from these Asian countries and stuff, but they seldom have big achievements in literature, art, comedy, and other things. And the ones who do, it's usually because they converted to Christianity. Look at Dinesh D'Souza. The guy's a genius. He's made all kinds of wonderful books and movies, but you don't see that much. There's tons of really smart people from India, but they don't do much in the arts or the creative fields unless they convert to Christianity, because Christianity inspires you to create something beautiful for the whole world. Otherwise, they typically use their high IQ, to become competent in their field, to make money for themselves and their family. Okay, that's nice, but if you want to be, a big-time, world-class scholar, you do something for the world, not just for yourself, your family. Okay. Let's see what else. The theme and the overall key message. The theme is the overall key message of a book, of a novel. And then you've got the characters. Typically, there'll be some hero. Then there'll be a big villain. There'll be, sidekicks, mentors, teachers, lovers, and all this stuff. And those are the characters that carry out the actions of the book. The plot is a purposeful progression of events. And then the style is just the way the writer puts it together. And those are the four big variables making a novel. And she talks about you have to know the ending of the novel and the climax that comes right before the ending before you should even begin writing the book. Because you have to have that figured out so that everything sort of converges towards that and it holds it all together. She'll say, the top-notch writers, they all start writing Act 3 of the play, if you will, versus rookies will often begin by writing Act 1. But she says if you start with Act 1 without knowing what's going to happen at the end, it's very hard to hold it all together. She said destruction of romanticism in literature is like destruction of individualism and ethics. And yeah, she's right. Basically, there are things that support collectivism, meaning this, nobody can own property, nobody can have free speech, and we're all just farm animals, all right? And that's sort of what the big dollars always want, is the majority of the people to just be basically like livestock, like farm animals that they own, versus individual volitionism, individualism. That's a big thing about where America came from, the American dream, that the individual can do things to make their life better. And that goes into individualism, capitalism, and all that stuff, and an Aristotelian view of the world. Okay, so what she's saying is that she's seen systematically these institutions being destroyed. The public school system was destroyed. Okay, you see groups like the Boy Scouts destroyed. You see, the art of painting destroyed and replaced with modern art. The art of sculpture destroyed and replaced with nonsense, okay, like Picasso's sculpture, that thing you don't even know what it is, all right? And nowadays, even worse, they make statues of turds. Okay, so anyways, that's what she's talking about. So what she's basically saying here is she believes that the world of literature was infiltrated by persons with bad intentions to promote collectivism, and they destroyed romantic realism, plus some of it happened as an inevitable consequence of the devastation of World War I, okay? And what she's trying to say is, let me tell you about what it was like before World War I back in the 1800s. I saw it. It does exist. Mankind is capable of this. It's magnificent. It's aesthetic light years ahead of where we are at today. And she wants to hold up to the sight of man how beautiful and wonderful literature and art can be. And she's afraid that a barbarian curtain is descending over the West. And she's absolutely right. That's what I mean by this lady's such a genius. Everybody talks about Nietzsche, back in like around 1880, he predicted that as God was fading out of man's viewpoint in Europe, that there would be endless trouble and wars and devastation and sadness amongst mankind. And she's basically saying all of that has now reached literature and is destroying literature. And it's going to take a big effort for literature to make a comeback, is what she's basically saying. And what I like about it is she's putting together lots of things that I didn't understand before about literature. And don't get me wrong, I've read this book. I've read her book like over about 5 times. It's such a masterpiece, okay? And like she explains to me that, for example, I knew when I had taken a class in Russian literature when I was in college at Stanford, and I knew that I hated Tolstoy. And I didn't know why. I'm just like, this guy is an asshole. I would read Tolstoy and I'm like, his book is so beautiful. His description of the characters, like Anna Karenina, the relationship between Anna and Vronsky. Vronsky, they would talk about him sitting in a stagecoach rubbing his calf on a hot sunny day. And I'm like, wow, it's magnificent. I felt like I was there. But at the end of the book, basically they had an illicit affair and she had been married to some grouchy old guy she had nothing in common with. But the way the book worked, you could never see meaning, purpose, volition, and hope. And in the end, Anna commits suicide, and Vronsky pretty much does the same thing, going out to some trivial, meaningless conflict, where he's, going to get killed. And it was sort of like, what was the point of that book? Why did I just read hundreds of pages to see the 2 lead characters commit suicide? What the crap was that? And so what Ayn Rand would say, she says, Tolstoy is evil. She says, I despise Tolstoy. I hate Tolstoy. She says, to read Tolstoy is like walking into a backyard that's unsanitary and you do not care to enter it, full of dog turds, okay? And I agree with her. The more you study Tolstoy, the more you will hate him. Read about Tolstoy's biography in the book Intellectuals by Paul Johnson. He was terrible to his family. He was terrible to his serfs. He was a scumbag. You won't like him. Anyways, Dostoevsky is much better. With Dostoevsky, there's hope. With Dostoevsky, there's redemption, okay? And you read Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha, the great, Christian man, that's inspired me, because I saw how Ivan, even though he was a genius, Ivan couldn't, because he was trending into atheism, and it just messed him all up. And I actually think Ayn Rand's trend into atheism prevents her from, seeing the human side of characters, okay? Because her characters are kind of stiff. They're square characters, if you will, to project her philosophic views rather than emotional characters you can relate to. Okay, Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, magnificent character. She reminds me of a lot of women I've known in my life, and it's a great insight into how she behaves, how they think. I found that highly valuable, especially the line where she said men are so conceited, they believe anything you tell them, and that makes it so easy to manipulate. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my wife thinking out loud. All right, my ex-wife. Okay, so she says, Gone with the Wind integrates a romantic conflict with a theme. Scarlett loves a man of the Old South, Ashley, and is loved by a man in the New South, Rhett Butler. And then I was thinking, too, Rhett Butler's suffering at the hands of Scarlett makes you feel sorry for him, because otherwise you would be jealous of him, because he's almost too perfect. Clark Gable, the most handsome man, the tallest man, the richest man, the strongest man, the most successful man. He's like too perfect, okay? But Scarlett just makes the poor guy miserable. She's such a jerk to him. Okay, plot is dramatization of the character's goals. There has to be a struggle and a conflict. That keeps us reading when we see the hero characters, having setbacks and how are they going to overcome them. She emphasizes, don't say a character is this or that. Have the character do something that shows they are this or that. Like a good person helps other people, tells the truth when it's not in their financial interest, is brave, follows their goals, their good goals. Romanticism books tend to center around a heroic male character. Naturalism tends to be about some freak or monstrous character or serial killer, something like that. And Ayn Rand is not soft on non-Western cultures. Her attitude is, if you don't push for freedom, you suck, okay? So here's what she says. She says, the apostles of irrationality, like Zen Buddhists, do not have a sense of life. They have a sense of doom. Okay, so she's not at all buying any of these godless Eastern religions. She also doesn't go at all for third world. She doesn't believe in the noble savage of Rousseau at all. She basically says, why should we cater to the savages of the world. You know, they don't want anything from us but the money of our prosperous countries. She says it's not our fault they're backwards. So she's a pretty outspoken, assertive lady. And lots of people hate Ayn Rand. They go, oh, she's a selfish bitch, she's evil. No, she's not. What she's talking about is individualism. She says everybody should have the right to live their life the way, whatever way they want, as long as they don't hurt other people. And she's got a good point in that. And she's able to recognize all the indirect collectivism stuff to take the freedom away of individuals. And she did not like it because in Soviet Russia they took away the family's pharmacy that they owned. They screwed her father over. She saw all kinds of people starving and dying, and she fled Russia. And then she comes to New York, and there's these big skyscrapers and all these millionaires, and she's like, wow, I've got a chance to make it here. What a great country this is. And then she studied the founding of this country, and she was amazed at how magnificent it was and said it's the greatest thing she's ever seen, the greatest country she's ever seen in her life by far. Okay, here she goes. Art is a cultural barometer of an age. Modern art is the barometer measurement that shows the cultural bankruptcy of our age. Probably the second most influential philosopher would be Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter's a writer. A lot of people don't like her either. Whenever a woman's a genius, everybody always says they're a bitch and they hate her. Okay, but in reality, Ann Coulter's another genius. She's a lot more funny. She's a lot funnier than Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand barely even has a sense of humor. And Coulter's great at building up a tone in a book until she, climaxes it with a great joke. But Ayn Rand has a higher IQ, and Ayn Rand knows more. Ayn Rand has read more than Coulter has. Coulter is especially focused, for example, on politics, but Ayn Rand's more focused on literature, culture, and a lot of stuff, and philosophy. Okay. Ayn Rand, here's a great line by Ayn Rand. The disease can occur subconsciously, but a cure can only be achieved consciously. So what she's basically saying is, look at the typical fat, sick, and stupid American. They made themselves fat, sick, and stupid by eating a Western diet, the SAD diet. And that was done unconsciously without even thinking about it. But the only way they'll ever get better is if they consciously learn about nutrition and move to becoming a low-fat, low-sodium vegan with no oils. Okay, so they have to develop awareness and motivation to get better before they even have a chance of so doing. Okay, Ayn Rand, my philosophy is in essence the concept of man being a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity and reason his only absolute. Okay, then she says, there is no difference between communism and socialism, except in the means of achieving the same ultimate end. Communism proposed to enslave men by force. Socialism to enslave them by a vote. It's merely the difference between murder and suicide. Okay. She continues, the three questions for a writer are, what do you want to say? How will you say it? And have I really said it? Then, romantic art is the fuel and the spark plug of a man's soul. Its task is to set a soul on fire and to never let it go out. And I totally know what she's saying. For example, when I see, the School of Athens, I'm like, wow, what a great tribute to the great philosophers of ancient Greece. And I'm like, wow, I wish there would be something equivalent for the modern age, and I could be on that in that painting, So it's a great inspiring motivator when you see great art. And just to get a sense of it, like here is a statue of Jesus by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, 1680, and he was considered like the Michelangelo of the 1600s. And it's just magnificent, it's like perfection. Here's the Pietà, the greatest statue ever made in the history of the world by Michelangelo, 1499. And basically, yeah, sure, it's Jesus Christ with his mother, but it was also Michelangelo in himself. He died. His mother died when he was about 7 years old. So, he longed for her, and this is like his mother, and that's him, okay? And a lot of times the artist is taking an event from their life, their own biography, if you will, and putting it into a story, into their creative art. And that actually leads to the best art. And then here's our depraved, sick modern world where they've got a statue of a turd in front of all these ugly office buildings that look like animal cages. And even in the art museum, this one here is in Rotterdam, there's a bunch of statues of a turd. And I said, can you imagine if a person from the Renaissance came here and he saw, instead of seeing the beautiful Michelangelo statues, he sees turds out in front of our public buildings, statues of turds in our art museum. You say, these people are sick, they're retarded, they are evil, they're so bad and unconscious and stupid that I can't even begin to say it. It's a disgrace. People should be protesting this. You should say, get this piece of crap out of here. We don't want a piece of crap in front of our building. We don't want our building to look like animal cages. We don't want statues of feces in our art museums? Get out of here. This is an insult. And if you're not insulted by it, then you're stupid, okay? This is a major insult. Okay, Ayn Rand continues, and I call her a Christian atheist because even though she says she's an atheist, all she ever does is say how great Christian art is, nonstop. She goes on and on about it. Okay, again, I am the bridge between the aesthetic achievements of the 19th century and the minds that choose to discover them. It is impossible for the young people of today to grasp the reality of man's higher potential and what a scale of achievement it had reached. But I have seen it. I know it was real, that it existed, that it is possible. It is this knowledge that I want to hold up to the sight of men over a brief span of less than a century, before the barbarian curtain descends altogether, if it does, and the last memory of man's greatness vanishes into another dark ages. Okay, now here's a great quote by Ayn Rand. In order for a man to live, a man must act. And in order to act, he must make choices. In order to make choices, he must define a code of values. In order to define a code of values, he must know what he is and where he is. He must know his own nature and the universe in which he acts. In other words, he needs philosophy. He cannot escape from this need. His only alternative is whether the philosophy guiding him is chosen by his mind or by chance. And here she is going on about Victor Hugo. I love the work of Victor Hugo in a deeper sense than admiration for his superlative literary genius, and I find many similarities between his sense of life and mine, although I disagree with virtually all of his explicit philosophy. Yeah, Victor Hugo is kind of interesting. He's been called the retarded genius because his books are sublime. They're awesome. They're beyond like normal human effort. But in his own personal life, he was a little stupid about a lot of things. And he didn't really understand economics or philosophy or politics. But man, when he wrote his book, it's like his subconscious mind understood better than his conscious mind. Ayn Rand continues, I like Dostoevsky for his superb mastery of plot structure and for his merciless dissection of the psychology of evil. Even though his philosophy and sense of life are almost diametrically opposed to mine. Yeah, she just had a thing against Christianity. She said, I cannot stand Tolstoy. His sense of life is not merely mistaken, but it is evil. Anna Karenina is the most evil book in serious literature. Hugo gives me the feeling of walking into a cathedral. Yep, there she goes again, admiring all the Christian writers. The integration of an important theme with a complex plot structure is the most difficult achievement possible to a writer, and the rarest. Its great masters are Victor Hugo and Dostoevsky. If you wish to see literary art at its highest, study the manner in which the events of their novels proceed from, express, illustrate, and dramatize their themes. The integration is so perfect that no other events could have conveyed the theme. Romanticism is a product of the 19th century, a largely subconscious result of two great influences. Number one, Aristotelianism, which had liberated man's mind by validating the power of his mind. So what she's basically saying, Aristotle says, yes, we can think, we can figure things out, and that's actually opposite of Immanuel Kant, who Ayn Rand hated, because Kant would basically say, you can't trust your eyes and your ears. And she'd say, oh, shut up, Kant, you evil hippie scumbag. Okay, among novelists, the greatest are Victor Hugo and Dostoevsky, and as single novels whose authors were not always consistent in their other works, I would name Henryk Sienkiewicz and Quo Vadis. She felt that was the greatest novel ever written, Quo Vadis by Sienkiewicz. And also Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. That's a magnificent book as well. The distinguishing characteristic of this top rank, apart from their purely literary genius, is their full commitment to the promise of volition. These writers are enormously considered with man's soul. They are moralist in the most profound sense of the word. Their characters are larger than life, motivated by their struggle in pursuit of spiritual goals and by profound value conflicts. If philosophical significance is the criterion of what is to be taken seriously, then these are the most serious writers in world literature. Philosophically, Romanticism is a crusade to glorify man's existence. Psychologically, it is experienced simply as a desire to make life interesting. Modern art is the most eloquent demonstration of the cultural bankruptcy of our age. Okay.